Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Today I am joined by Don Susantha Katugampala, Accredited Immigration Law Specialist and the head of FAIRFIELDS Lawyers and Australia Gateway. He is here to shed some light on Australia's federal budget for 2021 and to give us some insight on how it will affect migration. Susantha, thank you for being here today. It is my understanding that you were present in Parliament in Canberra on Tuesday the 11th of May when the federal budget was being delivered. Would you like to give us some insight on what was outlined that day and how it affects migration in Australia?
Yes, the budget for 2021 and 22 is the economic statement for the Australian economy and the country. This was a very positive budget. The government has taken so many initiatives to support the Australian economy and the country and the people. And the migration aspect of that budget is also a positive news. Especially, the government has decided to maintain the same numbers of immigration quota, immigration intake as 2020 and 21. Means the government is aiming to achieve 160,000 places in total for migration. That includes the skills, business, family and special migration. Everything together is aimed to be 160,000 places for financial year 21 and 22, which is an excellent news. Therefore, this proves that the Australian government believes that the migration program will benefit this country. And that's the insight, that's the feeling of the members in the parliament that we've seen on the budget day.
So you mentioned that the numbers are changing. What sort of numbers are we looking at the moment?
So the total numbers will be 160,000 places a year, and that 160,000 places is divided into different sectors, and for skill migration about 79,000 places, and family migration about 76,000 places, and then there are some places for special categories and child visas and so forth. And generally the government will never achieve that top end of 160,000, and what happens is that you end up in a lower number. New financial year, the government is aiming to achieve significant numbers for skill migration, which is 79,000 places. But the important news is that the borders are closed. So the people from overseas, offshore, will not be able to arrive in Australia. And the government policy, as the Prime Minister announced last year, while the borders are closed, while the overseas net immigration intake is low, the government is giving priority to people, the temporary residents and the students in Australia to obtain their permanent residence.
Okay, so the onshore applicants are getting a bit of priority there.
Absolutely. So the 79,000 places mainly will go into the onshore graduates and onshore temporary residents. But there is an offshore component. That's the business and investor migration stream, where the government is still granting visas and bringing people on business and investor visas. It is an important aspect to the Australian economy. That's the policy. So if you're a business or investor migrant coming from overseas, then certainly you have the opportunity to obtain your visa and arrive in Australia while the borders are closed. But if you're in Australia as a student, graduate, and if you are eligible to apply for your migration, if you're eligible to qualify under the skill migration program, then you can certainly achieve your migration while you are in Australia. So it is beneficial to the onshore applicants, especially in skill migration.
Now you mentioned skilled migration a few times. Are there separate components to skilled migration?
Yeah, there are separate components. Mainly the general skill migration. There is independent skills. There's employer-sponsored migration. There's regional and state-nominated skill migration, and global talent visas, and then the business and investor visas. They all come under one skill migration component, the business, including the business migration. So the government's policy is to grant the skill migration, the employer-sponsored visas for people who are in Australia, currently residing in Australia. The overseas skill migrant applicants are not allowed to enter Australia at this moment, especially the provisional subclass 491 visa holders or the temporary resident visa holders are not allowed to come to Australia. The only offshore applicants can be granted a visa under skill migration would be the business and investor visa holders. And they can also arrive in Australia even on a provisional visa subclass 188, which is a good news for business and skill migration applicants.
Now, you mentioned offshore applicants. I know that there's quite a lot of students that would love to come here and would love to study here. What kind of information was outlined in the budget for them?
International education, international students are an important aspect to the Australian economy. It's a major export of the Australian economy. One of the top 4 major exports of Australia is international education. Right now, the international students aren't allowed to arrive in Australia because of the border closure. Borders are closed. So therefore, the government is encouraging universities to enroll students to study online from offshore, and while they're enrolled and studying offshore, their study is considered as they studied in Australia during this time, which is a good policy by the government. However, the students are not allowed to arrive in Australia physically until the borders are open. And of course, it's a challenging times for universities and students who want to arrive in Australia and physically be here to study. But the Australian government policy is not to allow the international students to come. But the good news is, if you're thinking of studying in Australia while you're here as a temporary resident, the government has a flexible policy on student visas. So there's a criteria called GTE, Genuine Temporary Entrant Criteria, to be satisfied for any applicant who apply for student visa. If you have been here on a temporary visa for so long, then you apply for a student visa extension. Under normal circumstances, you are likely to be refused. But right now, the government exercises a flexible policy on student visas for people who are in Australia. So therefore, if you want to rethink of studying or undertake a course, it may be the best time and opportunity to apply for a student visa, if you're eligible to apply, and obtain a student visa and complete your study, if that helps you to get your permanent residence or upgrade your skills.
Now, we also have a lot of migrants who came here to study and then are now on their temporary residence visas. How will this affect them?
So this policy of maintaining the same numbers for skill migration in Australia, the quotas or the numbers, will definitely benefit the onshore students and the temporary residents. And but they'll have to find the way to qualify for their skill migration program. Could be on the employer-sponsored option or mainly the regional migration option, because the skill migration is still challenging for onshore students, because the government has announced different quotas for different occupations. When the quotas are less for certain occupations, such as accountants, then the pass mark will always go up. Although the accountants are on the main list, it will be extremely difficult to obtain permanent residence as an accountant under independent skill migration stream, because the quotas are low. So therefore, the certain graduates need to think of moving to a regional area, obtain employment, prove the residence in that regional area before they obtain their permanent residency. And that's an important aspect, and you need to understand your own pathway for your permanent residence. But certain occupations such as nursing, automotive mechanics, secondary school teachers, or engineers will have an opportunity to obtain your permanent residence under independent skilled migration program because the quotas are higher. And also the government is investing money into the digital economy. There was an announcement of investing over $1 billion to digital economy by the Prime Minister 2 weeks ago. With that, there's a boom and boost in IT and the computer sectors. So therefore, the IT graduates will have more potential to obtain their permanent residence, even while they are in a major city. So it all depends on the demand for certain occupations. As long as you understand how it works and you obtain proper advice, then you can secure your permanent residence in Australia.
So what I understand is you're saying that it is favorable to onshore applicants and like temporary residence visa holders that they should seek advice so to understand how to proceed.
Absolutely. And also the government is keep extending the temporary visa stream of COVID stream under subclass 408. If your visa had expired, then you're eligible to apply for subclass 408 to remain in Australia if you have a secure employment, and you just need to be employed and be able to support yourself to obtain that visa. So the government's not enforcing people to be out of the country, and which is a good news.
Yeah, definitely. Now, previously you mentioned that there's also the family migration. How does this work for them? Because I know that there's a lot of people here who are keen to have their partners, their parents to come here and to be with them.
Yes, this budget, the government has extended a very humanitarian approach into family migration because there are 76,000 places been announced for this financial year for family migration. That includes the partner visas, spouse visas, and parent visas. And mainly the partner and spouse visas. That means the family migrants who are the family members of the Australian citizens who are permanent residents will be able to obtain their permanent residence quickly. So the partners, spouses, whether they are in Australia or overseas, will be able to obtain a visa and get your visa quickly, enter Australia without a delay with the increase of these numbers, which is an excellent news.
Yes.
So whilst the government is encouraging the business and investor migrants to come in, invest, boost the economy, the government also looking at the humanitarian aspect for the families to unite and join, which is an excellent policy, which is a positive news from this budget.
Yes, definitely. I think everyone that's thinking about their family, everyone that's abroad, they must be very happy about that.
Absolutely.
And so now you mentioned that they can obtain the visa quickly, but how long will the international borders be closed for? Have they given any sort of indication as to that?
Right now, whilst the borders are closed, generally the Australian citizens or permanent residents or the business migrant holders are allowed to come here, but they need to go under quarantine, and the quarantine numbers are the beds are limited in the country, so therefore that everyone cannot come, and there are other international pressures and the pandemic eruption in India as such, and so therefore the government will have difficulties in bringing all these people at once. But certainly if you got your permanent residence or you're a citizen, you're technically allowed to come, and while the borders are closed. But the border opening will probably happen sometime 2022. So looks like that with this pandemic, especially in relation to international borders and immigration, we have lost over 2 years. And until the borders open, the international visitors are not allowed to come. International students are not allowed to come unless there are small numbers can come as test runs. So it'll be a big challenge to the Australian economy, especially what benefits the Australian economy is the net overseas migration intake. Okay, so that net overseas migration intake is the net arrivals from overseas to Australia, whether they come under migration program or students or visitors. the net amount bring the value to the Australian economy. And it has a direct connection with the GDP, and it helps the GDP growth. But unfortunately, with the pandemic, the border closure, the net overseas migration intake is running in minus at the moment. So therefore, migration helping the Australian economic growth is minimal at this point of time. So that's bad news. So therefore, the government should look at opening the borders as soon as possible, whilst the Australian government wants to protect the Australians from the pandemic. So it's a challenge, it's a global challenge, but the government's making every effort to look after the economy, look after people's livelihood, and the health, and the mental health, and many aspects in the country.
We all understand that the border closure is to keep everyone that's in Australia safe, but you mentioned that so if you have PR or citizenship, your partner and your family would be able to get visas quickly. Would they be allowed to travel to Australia while the borders are still closed?
Yes, if you're a spouse or a child of an Australian citizen or a permanent resident, you're eligible to obtain a temporary visitor visa and accompany them and come here as a visitor. So the government has allowed that, and we've done that for many people from overseas. So the rules are tough, but when it's necessary, the government is willing to extend some flexibility.
Susantha, do you have any final insight or advice that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Yes, with this budget 2021 and 22, it's an excellent news for onshore graduates and temporary residents to secure their permanent residence whilst they're in Australia. But your matter is an individual matter, and your solution is an individual solution. There's no common solution, there's no common remedy for everyone. So therefore, you need to find your remedy, you need to find your own pathway, you need to seek proper legal advice and understand your circumstances, and you need to fit into the framework. So that's the final advice. As long as you get good advice, as long as you understand your pathway properly, then you can secure your permanent residence in Australia. For overseas students or graduates or temporary residents who are in Australia, there's no better time to secure their permanent residency than now. This financial year, even the next financial year. So therefore, do your best to secure your PR if you wish to do so. All the best.
Susantha, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your insight and giving valuable advice to our audience today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Last thank you message.
Okay, the last.
You just end the.
Okay.